In the spring of 2010, Apple changed the world again when it introduced its new tablet computer. Hello, welcome to From Print to iPad, designing for tablets and other mobile devices. I'm Joseph Caserto. I'm a design professional, educator, and consultant. I have over 17 years of experience as a publication art director and designer, and worked on the staffs of several national magazines before starting my own business. Since then, I've worked with many publications including Fortune, Marie Claire, PC, TV Guide, and Vibe. I'm also an adjunct instructor at New York University in the Design, Digital Arts, and Film Department of the School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and was formerly an adjunct lecturer at the City College of New York in the Art Department's Electronic Design and Multimedia program. When Apple introduced the iPad, the print world took notice. Of course, it had introduced the iPhone several years before, and several print publications had developed apps for that device. And of course, there are other devices that people could read content on, like Amazon's Kindle and the Barnes & Noble Nook, which came in black and white and color. The iPad, though, was different. Now, critics said it was just a larger iPhone, but according to Wired magazine, they made a very interesting observation. By expanding iPhone-sized application, it, meaning the iPad, creates a new paradigm, paper that's alive. And really that's what was the big appeal to publishing companies. It was a new medium that added motion and sound to a printed page when it displayed it on the screen. So it's kind of overwhelming for a designer to have all of these different devices and figure out how to actually produce content on it that will speak to an audience. Now, this tutorial is going to focus mostly on the iPad, but a lot of the principles we talk about are going to be applicable to other devices too. We'll even talk a little bit about some web design. So, up first we're going to talk about one of the basic rules of design, less is more, and we're going to talk about it in the context of these devices. When you're designing for devices, it's important to remember to keep it simple. Your screen size is going to determine how much information you can actually put on your design. So let's take a look. I'm going to compare this printed edition of Fortune to the iPad and to the iPhone. Well, visually you can see right away that the sizes are different. And when we take a look at the actual screens of those devices compared to the size of the printed magazine, you can see that there's even less space. So what we're going to do is to compare that printed size to the iPad first. So when we take a look at the actual page that ran in the printed edition of Fortune versus the same page for the iPad edition of Fortune, you can actually see that there is a lot of information that was left out. And what has happened is that it actually wasn't left out of the story itself, it was left out of the individual pages. What has happened is that all of that information has been added over a series of pages, in this case 4 pages. And really why that is your reader is simply going to be overwhelmed by all of that information, and if that same printed page was sized down for the iPad screen, the reader would have to zoom in and out, and that's going to create more work. So let's see what they did. They actually took the first story and they converted it into not only its own page, but a page with a hotspot, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then they took the other pieces and they put them over a second and a third page. And when we take a look at the iPad edition here, the hotspot that I mentioned actually takes the information that ran in the printed piece and it presents it graphically. So it actually takes the information that was there in the print version, and it actually expands it a little bit for the iPad version. So it creates icons for each of the states. When we take a little bit of a closer look, you can see that there's an instruction. There's an icon and it says touch here to see the top 10 states for deer collisions, which is what this story is about. And that's what brings up the hotspot. And that's what brings up those states and the icons of the states. So let's take another example, this time for the web. and see how that translates to an iPhone app. This is the American Airlines homepage. And as you can see, it's pretty complex. So one of the things for the web is that size is going to change. You're not actually, like in a brown printed magazine, working with the same page size from page to page inside the edition of that magazine. On the web, of course, your viewer can change the size of your page simply by expanding or shrinking the browser window. So when the American Airlines app for the iPhone was developed, basically what they did was they took the buttons that you would see at the top of the page, and they used that on the home screen of the iPad edition. So one of the big differences here versus the Fortune example that I showed is that in the Fortune example, all of the content that is in the magazine is used in the iPad edition. That's very intentional because the people at Fortune feel like the reader on the iPad should not be shortchanged versus the reader on the print edition. So here in the iPhone app for American Airlines, they actually did take away some content, and that's actually common for app design versus web design. There's certain functions that are certainly not, there's just simply not going to be on the app edition for the phone. And of course this is iPhone, but there are also apps for the Android phone and other phones. So up next we're going to talk about what you need to do to make the information legible on those smaller screens.